March 2011, Hope Springs International Airport, Texas. Amidst the usual bustling, noisy atmosphere of a busy airport, where encounters and farewells unfold, democracy in fleeting moments, there was a small corner that seemed to stand still, separate from the hurried flow surrounding it. There, Mrs. Sarah Miller, her hair turned the ashen color of time, each silver strand a testament to 30 long years of waiting. Her eyes sunken globokimi from many sleepless nights, was trembling protena. She leaned on the arm of her eldest daughter, Laura. Laura, too, couldn't hide her tension. Her hand gripped her mother's kitaitsi, as if to transmit a little warmth, a little strength. Mrs. Miller's gaze ceaselessly scanned the crowd emerging from Gate 7, a searching look, filled with fragile hope mingled with a vague fear, a fear that all of this might just be a dream, and she would wake up to the harsh reality. 30 years, 10,950 days, each day a battle against longing, against despair, and against a faith that refused to be extinguished. She had lived, she had breathed, she had existed solely to await this moment. And then, from that gate, amidst the stream of people, 3 tall, dignified figures gradually emerged. 3 men in their early 40s, their faces bearing the marks of life's experiences, yet as identical as 3 drops of water. They, too, appeared restless, bewildered, their eyes also searching for something or someone in a place entirely unfamiliar to them. The moment their 4 pairs of eyes, the mother's and her 3 sons, met across the sea of people, time seemed to freeze. All surrounding sounds seemed to dissolve into nothingness. Not a word was. Sarah Miller slowly, tremblingly, tried to step towards them. Her legs felt as if they had no strength left after so many years of weary waiting and hoping. The 3 men, upon recognizing the familiar gaze and form from the photographs Laura had carefully sent them to Tibaha a few days prior, also quickened their pace, almost running, bypassing other passengers who looked on inquisitively. And then, like an uncontrollable natural reflex, after so many years fatators, without need for an introduction, without need for any confirmation, a broken, choked call escaped her parched lips, calling the name of each beloved child, names she had called tens of thousands of times in her dreams and in her silent nightly prayers. David, Michael, Peter, my sons, my dear sons, is it truly you? No verbal answer was needed. The 3 men, the triplet boys of yesteryear, now fully grown, with complex emotions churning within them, rushed forward simultaneously, almost kneeling, and embraced the mother they only vaguely remembered through distant childhood memories, as hazy as a wisp of smoke from a past life. The hugs were so tight they were breathtaking, shoulders trembled violently with emotion, and tears, not of sorrow, but of a reunion's happiness, of release after 3 long decades of separation, of being stolen from each other's lives, just flowed, hot and copious, soaking their shoulders. One of the 3, perhaps David, the eldest by birth order, who had always carried a vague sense of responsibility for his twin brothers since childhood, whispered through his tears, his voice also breaking with uncontrollable emotion. Mom, that was a moment for which no words on earth could fully suffice. 30 years of separation, 30 years of unanswered questions, of a pain that had seemed to turn to stone in a mother's heart, of lives diverted onto different paths by an unforgivable crime. Now it all burst forth in a sea of unrestrained emotion. The triplet children, identical little angels, who had vanished without a trace from the peaceful town of Hope Springs, Texas, on a fateful summer day in 1981, had now truly returned, in flesh and blood, standing mom before the mother who had spent her entire life searching and hoping, the mother whose flame of love and faith had never flickered, not even for a second. That miraculous and overwhelming reunion was not a random event fallen from the sky. It was the culmination of days and nights of tension, of agonizing decisions, and of a plan meticulously and cautiously laid out, all taking place within a short week just prior. A week that perhaps, for those involved, felt as long as an entire century of pent-up emotions, anxieties, and hopes. After the horrifying truth about the true identities of the three young men, David, Michael, and Peter, along with the unforgivable crime of the woman named Martha Henderson, was irrefutably confirmed by the investigating authorities with solid scientific evidence, Mrs. Sarah Miller and her eldest daughter Laura, with the crucial support of their private investigator. How could one convey such earth-shattering truth to three men in their early 40s, men who had lived their entire lives built upon an utterly false foundation? That everything they had ever known about their origins, about the family they had, was merely an elaborate and cruel deception. That the mother they had loved and respected daily, the one who had raised them for 30 years, was in fact the very person who had ruthlessly kidnapped them from the warm embrace of their birth mother, from their true home, when they were just innocent 4-year-old children. That they had another mother, a mother who had spent her entire life, her youth and her old age, searching for them in vain. An older sister they had never known, a family that had ached and waited for them for 30 long years. It was a horrific psychological burden, a heavy responsibility no one would wish to bear. Letters were carefully drafted, each word weighed for its truthfulness and potential to minimize harm, only to be torn up in helplessness and anxiety. Phone calls were considered, every sentence, every word meticulously planned. How could one deliver news that could completely overturn the worldview of these three men? Would they even be able to accept this truth? Would they want to meet their birth mother, who, to them, was perhaps only a strange concept, a vague image? Finally, after many sleepless nights of deliberation, after many intense discussions with psychological experts and with their own consciences, they decided that a direct, sincere, and open meeting in a safe environment with psychological support was the best and most humane approach. Though they knew it would be emotionally challenging for everyone involved, it was something that had to be done. The truth, no matter how painful, needed to be faced so that a healing process could begin, a journey of rediscovery for all three long-lost sons, through careful and professional channels of communication, with the support of psychologists dispatched from Texas to work directly with the three young men in Oregon. The truth about their life story was gradually unveiled. It was not a sudden. The initial shock for them, of course, was unavoidable, something no one could fully anticipate the extent of. Utter bewilderment upon learning their lives were a fabrication. Anger, fury towards Martha Henderson, the woman they had called mother, who had deceived them for so many years. Confusion before a completely unknown past, a family they had never known existed. And then, mingled with these chaotic emotions, was a vague longing, an inexplicable curiosity, to know about their true origins, about the mother who had given birth to them, about the biological relatives they had a right to know. After days of intense internal struggle, after profound and tearful conversations with the psychologists, and perhaps after private discussions, sleepless nights among the three identical brothers, they collectively made a momentous decision. They wanted to meet their birth mother. They wanted to hear the truth from her own lips. They wanted to reclaim a part of their stolen lives, to rediscover themselves. And so, the plane tickets from Oregon to Texas were booked. The date and time for the historic meeting at Hope Springs Airport were carefully set. For Sarah and Laura, those were both the longest and shortest days of their lives. They cleaned the house, especially the old upstairs room of the three boys, which Sarah had kept almost untouched for 30 years, as a way to welcome her beloved children home. Even though she knew they were now grown men, no longer the 4-year-old boys of her memory. Sarah tremblingly chose her best clothes she had saved for a long time, for a special occasion she had always hoped would come, wondering if her sons would recognize her, if they would accept her after so many years of separation and the deceptions that might have been sown. The thrill mixed with overwhelming joy. Meanwhile, in Oregon, the three brothers, David, Michael, and Peter, also packed their bags with hearts, prebivania, in a turmoil of conflicting emotions. What would they say to the mother they had never known, the mother whose image only existed through the faded photographs Laura had sent them? How would this meeting unfold? How would their lives, and the lives of both families, change after this encounter? Thousands of unanswered questions swirled in their minds. But one thing was certain. They knew this journey was necessary, an unavoidable turning point in their lives. That was the context, the psychological developments, and the courageous decisions that brought all of them to Hope Springs Airport in March 2011, ultimately creating the moment of overwhelming, joyous reunion that we witnessed at the beginning of this story. But what provided that unshakable certainty to Sarah and those co-helped her? What information had been so absolutely verified that it allowed them to bravely plan for this fateful reunion, a meeting that could completely change the lives of everyone involved? It was the moment when the final veil of secrecy surrounding the woman named Martha Henderson was completely torn out of Oliver. Just a few short days before, a confrontation where truth, however belated, finally triumphed over a deception that had been maintained and disguised for 3 long decades. Let us now step back a few more days in time, before even those plane tickets carrying so much hope and anxiety were booked. Let us go to the 2-story house, ordinary in appearance but concealing an earth-shattering secret, in the suburbs of Willow Creek, Oregon. Here, not long before the reunion plan was set in motion, a tense and decisive confrontation took place, a confrontation that brought the entire hidden truth to light. At that house, Martha Henderson, the woman who had lived nearly her entire adult life with a false identity for the 3 children she had kidnapped 30 years prior, had to face irrefutable evidence presented by the private investigator hired by Sarah's family, Mr. Peterson, along with local police officers who had been informed and were coordinating closely. Sarah and Laura, though their hearts were breaking with a desire to scream at the person who had caused such immense tragedy for their family, decided to remain at a nearby location, awaiting news. The private investigator, Mr. Peterson, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and sharp, discerning eyes, seasoned by decades of experience investigating complex cases, especially those involving missing persons, laid out the evidence his team had painstakingly and arduously gathered over many weeks. He did not rush, but calmly, methodically revealed each piece of the puzzle. First was the old, faded photograph taken at the Hope Springs Summer Festival in 1985, clearly showing Martha Henderson standing next to a young boy bearing Peter Miller's distinctive birthmark. The photograph was enlarged, the birthmark circled. Next were the recorded and transcribed testimonies of several former neighbors from Hope Springs, who, after being shown the photograph and related information, recognized Martha and confirmed unequivocally that she had abruptly left town around the same time the three Miller children had mysteriously vanished. But the most damning piece of evidence, the one that left Martha Henderson with absolutely no way out, was the preliminary DNA test result. Through skillful and discreet investigative work, Mr. Peterson's team had managed to obtain a hair sample from a comb belonging to one of the three young men Martha Henderson had always introduced to everyone as her adopted son, the one currently bearing the false name Alex Miller. The DNA comparison result with a sample from Mrs. Sarah Miller, the birth mother waiting anxiously in Texas, showed an almost perfect biological match. Alex Miller was, Sephiri, one of her three long-lost sons. DNA samples from the other two young men were also quickly obtained and yielded similar, irrefutable results. Initially, when faced with the first questions from Mr. Peterson and the police officers, Martha Henderson tried to deny everything. She wept dramatically, recounting how benevolently she had adopted three poor orphan boys after a tragic fire had claimed both their parents. She attempted to paint a picture of a virtuous adoptive mother, one who had sacrificed her entire life for her children, trying to misdirect the investigation with crocodile tears and fabricated stories. But before Mr. Peterson's sharp, logical questioning, unmoved by her theatrics, before the irrefutable scientific evidence laid out before her, the wall of lies that Martha Henderson had painstakingly built and maintained for 3 decades began to crack. Her demeanor shifted from feigned innocence and victimhood to panic, then pallor, and finally, to utter despair as she realized that everything was over, that her crime had finally been exposed. Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Peterson's voice rang out, clear and firm in the tense silence of the room, without a hint of compromise. We have sufficient evidence, irrefutable evidence, to believe that the 3 young men currently living with you, known as Alex, Ben, and Chris Miller, are in fact David, Michael, and Peter Miller, the 3 children who went missing from Hope Springs, Texas, 30 years ago. We need your full cooperation to clarify all matters, and that would be in the best interest of everyone, including yourself. And then, like a dam bursting under unbearable pressure, Martha Henderson she buried her face in her hands and sobbed uncontrollably. A torrent of tears, Angelo, from guilt exposed, from fear of legal retribution, and perhaps from a sliver of belated relief from the burden of the secret that had oppressed her for so many years. She confessed to her entire crime, confessed to planning and executing That was the moment the ultimate truth was laid bare. A painful, cruel truth, but also the moment the door of hope to a real reunion began to creak open. Sarah and Laura, upon receiving the news from Mr. Peterson over the phone, burst into tears right there in the hotel room where they were waiting. Tears of extreme anguish upon learning the truth of Martha's crime, but also tears of overwhelming, unbelievable joy, knowing that their sons, their brothers, were not only still alive, but that they knew exactly where they were, and that they were about to meet them after so many long years of seemingly hopeless separation. So what clue, after 3 decades of seemingly no hope, led the private investigator and Sarah to Martha Henderson's doorstep in a distant state? What clue was powerful enough to penetrate the thick veil of deception that Martha had so diligently maintained for so many years? It was, again, a seemingly insignificant detail, a forgotten image in an old, dusty photo album, a tiny birthmark on a child's ear, and a mother's boundless love that never gave up. Let us now journey back a few more weeks in time, even before that fateful confrontation with Martha Henderson. Let us return to the quiet, somewhat somber living room of Sarah Miller. On a gloomy January afternoon, when snow was still falling lightly outside her window in Texas. As a ritual she had followed for 30 years, a ritual casualties to soothe her longing and to remind herself never to give up. Whenever the ache of missing her children became unbearable, Sarah would seek solace in the few remaining mementos of them. The old armchair, where she used to cuddle her 3 boys and read them stories, still sat in its usual corner, covered by a faint layer of time's dust. The photo album, with its black and white and time-faded color pictures, the last images of her sons before they vanished, was still cherished by her like a most sacred treasure, the only tangible thread connecting her to her brief, happy past. That particular afternoon, Sarah felt an especially profound sense of loneliness and despair. Perhaps it was the bleak weather outside, the biting northeast wind whistling through the window cracks. Perhaps it was a dream about her sons the night before, a dream so vivid that upon waking, she could still feel their warmth. She tremblingly turned each page of the album, each photograph a knife twisting in her heart, but also a soothing balm, a confirmation that they had existed, that they had once been hers. The innocent smiles of David, Michael, and Peter, their adorable, mischievous pranks, their tiny arms wrapped around her neck. It all seemed like only yesterday. So vivid and sharp, it was painful. And then, as she neared the last page of the album, a photograph taken at the annual summer festival in their town of Hope Springs in 1985, 4 years after that fateful day her sons disappeared, suddenly caught her eye. She had seen this photograph countless times before. It was a crowded group shot, taken amidst the boisterous, joyful atmosphere of the festival. She usually just skimmed past it quickly. because it reminded her of the happy days in Hope Springs before tragedy struck her family, and also because it was taken after her sons had already gone missing, so she had always assumed it had no relevance to her search. But that afternoon, something different happened. Perhaps it was the way the light from the table lamp hit the photograph at a different angle. Perhaps it was a rare moment of mental clarity amidst her sorrow. Or perhaps it was the hand of destiny, after 30 years, finally deciding to reveal a glimmer of light, an unexpected clue. Sarah Miller's gaze suddenly fixated on a small corner of the photograph, a corner obscured behind some adults, a corner she had never paid close attention to before. In that corner of the photo, amidst a crowd of strangers, was the image of a boy, about 7 or 8 years old, holding a woman's hand. The boy had a chubby face, light brown, tousled hair, and then a tiny detail, but one that made Sarah Miller's heart stop processing for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. Just below the boy's left earlobe, a tiny, faint, but still discernible, if one looked very closely, crimson birthmark. A birthmark she could never forget, because it was the distinctive birthmark of Peter, her youngest triplet son. The birthmark she used to playfully call the angel's kiss to distinguish Peter from his 2 identical brothers. Sarah was stunned. Her entire body seemed to freeze. Her hands trembled violently. She fumbled Risoltos for the old magnifying glass she always kept nearby for reading her Bible at night. She tremblingly held the magnifying glass over that detail in the photograph. She looked again and again, rubbed her eyes and looked again, afraid she was mistaken, afraid it was just an illusion created by her immense longing for her son, by her old age and her failing eyesight. But no, it couldn't be a mistake. The child in the photo, though a little older than the last image she remembered of Peter at 4, but that birthmark, and even that familiar glint in his eyes, intelligent and a little mischievous. And the child was standing next to a woman she didn't recognize at all, a woman with a strange face, but there was something vague, indescribable in the lightning bolt leaded through Sarah Miller's mind. Peter? No, it can't be. My son. How could you be there in 1985, right here in Hope Springs? The woman standing next to you? Who is she? A torrent of uncontrollable questions flooded her mind. Tears began to stream down her face, tears of shock, of bewilderment, and of a wild, insane hope. A hope she thought had died long ago, now suddenly rekindled with fierce intensity. The initial shock passed, giving way to an extraordinary determination, a surge of energy she thought had been depleted after 30 weary years. This clue, however fragile, like a single thread in a storm, was the only ray of hope after 3 long decades engulfed in hopeless darkness. She immediately called her eldest daughter Laura, her voice trembling, but filled with a conviction she hadn't felt for many years. "Laura, honey, Mom, I think I found something. You have to come home right away." In the old album, the picture from the Hope Springs Summer Festival in 1985, there's a little boy who looks exactly like Peter. He has his birthmark. You have to see this. Laura, though all too familiar with her mother's hopes rising and falling like a tide over so many years, though she had countless times tried to gently persuade her mother to accept reality, this time, hearing the absolute conviction and unconcealed emotion in Sarah's voice, she too felt something was different. A strong premonition. She rushed to her mother's house immediately. Mother and daughter together examined the photograph again under the lamplight. Laura also had to admit the boy in the photo bore a striking resemblance to the childhood pictures of Peter, and especially that birthmark. It was too distinctive. They began a quiet but urgent investigation. They tried to recall everyone they knew who had attended the festival in 1985. They dug out old phone books, faded address ledgers. They contacted old friends, former neighbors still living in Hope Springs, anyone who might have some memory of that particular festival. They sent copies of the photograph Emociones via email and through newly emerging social media platforms with the faint hope that someone, somewhere, would recognize the woman standing next to the boy who looked so much like Peter. Many days passed in anxious waiting. Many responses were headshakes, sympathetic words, but no new information. But they did not give up. The newly kindled hope would not allow them to stop. And then, one evening, when they were almost beginning to feel disheartened again, luck smiled upon them. An old school friend of Laura's from Hope Springs, whom Laura hadn't contacted for a very long time, after carefully examining the photograph Laura had emailed, called back. Her voice was filled with surprise and some hesitation. "Laura, this woman, she looks familiar. I remember her. This is Martha Henderson. Wasn't she an old neighbor of your family for a short time before your brothers went missing? I remember after your brothers disappeared, she also suddenly moved out of town. No one knew where she went. There was some talk back then, but it died down because Martha Henderson." That name struck Sarah Miller like a thunderbolt, awakening all sorts of buried and forgotten memories. Yes, Martha Henderson, the quiet, seemingly gentle neighbor who occasionally brought homemade cookies for her boys. She, too, had vanished from Hope Springs without a word, not long after Sarah's sons had disappeared. Why, for all these years, had she never thought of this connection? Perhaps because at that time, the overwhelming grief, the chaos of the search, had clouded all judgment, all suspicion. Or perhaps Martha Henderson had been too clever in concealing her role, had created too perfect a disguise. From the name Martha Henderson, a crucial knot was untied. Sarah and Laura, now with a greater belief and determination than ever before, decided to act more professionally. Laura, after discussing with her mother, secretly hired a private investigator, Mr. Peterson, a man reputed for his experience in finding missing persons and solving complex cold cases that the police had given up on. They provided Mr. Peterson with all the information they had: the fateful photograph, the name Martha Henderson, and their vague memories of their former neighbor. The methodical search for Martha Henderson's trail began. It was by no means easy because after 30 years, Martha Henderson seemed to have deliberately erased all traces of her past in Hope Springs. She had changed her name multiple times, moved through several states. But with perseverance, sharp professional skills, contacts within the industry, and also a bit of luck that is indispensable in such investigations, Mr. Peterson's team eventually managed to track down a current residential address for a woman named Martha Henderson, whose age and some identifying features matched the person in the photograph, in the city of Willow Creek, Oregon. That was the key clue that led to the confrontation and the horrifying truth being exposed, as we heard a few minutes ago. An old, faded photograph, a tiny, almost insignificant birthmark, became the golden key that unlocked a secret buried and sealed for 30 long years. But the bigger question remains. During those 30 long years, while Sarah Miller was tirelessly searching in vain, while the precious clue from the photograph had not yet appeared, how exactly did the stolen lives of the 3 children, David, Michael, and Peter, unfold under the hand of Martha Henderson? And what was it that nurtured, that kept the flame of hope from ever extinguishing in the heart of that unfortunate mother? The mother who never stopped believing in a miracle. Let us journey further back in time, into the years when the 3 Miller boys grew up unaware of their true identities, unaware of the profound pain and relentless search of their birth mother who longed for them day and night. After committing her cruel and selfish act in the summer of 1981, kidnapping 3 innocent 4-year-old children, Martha Henderson quickly left Hope Springs, Texas, like a phantom vanishing in the night, leaving behind no goodbyes or any trace. She, along with her husband, a man whom investigators later believed might have been a passive accomplice, or at least aware of the situation, but silenced by coercion and fear, moved to another state and then continued to move multiple times during the initial years. The purpose of these constant relocations was none other than to sever all ties with the past, to erase any tracks that could be discovered by the police or the Miller family, ensuring that her terrible secret would never be revealed. David, Michael, and Peter Miller now bore entirely new, unfamiliar names given to them by Martha: Alex, Ben, and Chris Henderson. Martha created a completely new identity for them, a carefully fabricated backstory. She told all her new neighbors, the teachers at the new schools they attended, that they were 3 orphaned triplet brothers whom she had benevolently adopted from an orphanage in some distant city, after their biological parents had tragically perished in a devastating fire. A story so meticulously constructed and seemingly pitiable that few people doubted it, or if they did, they didn't feel it was their place to inquire. The three boys grew up in new environments, attended new schools, tried to make new friends, tried to adapt to new lives. Martha Henderson, in the role of a devoted adoptive mother, took care of them materially. They had enough food to eat, clothes to wear, and were sent to school like other children. But it was a life built on a foundation of lies, a deception that permeated every day, every hour, every moment of their childhood. Although Martha tried to appear as a loving mother, there was always an invisible wall, an unspoken tension, an indescribable distance separating her from the three children. She controlled them very tightly, perhaps due to her constant fear, her obsession that her secret would be exposed one day. She minimized their interaction with the outside world as much as possible, especially with people who might ask too many curious questions about her past or the children's origins. Parent-teacher meetings, visits from their classmates, were all subtly controlled by Martha or skillfully declined with seemingly plausible excuses. She wanted to keep them in a safe cocoon of her own making, a cocoon of deceit. As Alex, Ben, and Chris grew older, as they began to develop a clearer awareness of the world around them, questions about their origins, about their past, naturally began to surface in their minds. Why did they not have any baby pictures, while all their friends had entire albums of such memories? Why did Mother Martha always evade or become visibly uncomfortable, even angry, whenever they innocently asked about their deceased biological parents, about the orphanage where they were supposedly adopted from? Martha's answers were always contradictory, vague, or she would brush them off with excuses of being busy, work, or even feign sadness and grief to make them stop asking. To make Mother Martha, why don't we have any grandparents, aunts, or uncles like our other friends? Why does no one ever visit us on holidays? One of the three children, perhaps Michael, the most contemplative and sensitive one, had once innocently asked such a question during an evening meal. Martha merely sighed, put down her fork, stroked the boy's hair perfunctorily, and then said that her family lived very, very far away, and that their biological family, tragically, had no one left in this world. It was a sad story she didn't want to revisit because it would break her heart. A clever answer to extinguish a child's curiosity. Nevertheless, fragmented memories, vague feelings of something lost, occasionally crept into their young minds, especially in their dreams. Strange, disjointed dreams of another woman with a very kind and warm smile, of another house with a sun-drenched yard and familiar wooden toys they had never seen in Mother Martha's house. But upon waking, they could never make sense of these feelings, could never connect these fragmented, piecemeal images. They only knew that, despite having Mother Martha by their side, taking care of their every meal and sleep, they always felt an unnamed emptiness, an unexplained sadness, a feeling of being outsiders, of not truly belonging here, like misplaced pieces in a larger, unseen puzzle. They had no idea that in a very distant place, thousands of miles away, their birth mother, Mrs. Sarah Miller, was still, day and night, yearning for them, still cherishing every tiny memento of them, and still believing that one day, by some miracle, she would find them again, her beloved children who had been stolen from her life. And so, during those 30 years that David, Michael, and Peter grew up in deception and devoid of their true familial love, what kind of life did their birth mother, Mrs. Sarah, after the initial search efforts yielded no results, after the police had almost relegated the case of the 3 Miller boys to the cold case archives, cases that perhaps would never be solved, many people in Sarah's situation might have collapsed, might have given up all hope, might have tried to forget in order to move on. But not Sarah. The flame of hope in that mother's heart, though at times it seemed to be nothing more than a faint, flickering ember amidst the blizzard of despair, never truly went out, never completely died. The pain of losing her children was a wound that never healed in her heart. It throbbed dully every day, every hour, like an underground lava flow beneath a frozen crust of endurance. Every morning she woke up. The first thing she thought of was the image of her 3 little boys. Every night she drifted off to sleep, their innocent laughter echoed in her fitful dreams. But she chose not to let the pain drown her in the abyss of despair. She chose to transform the pain into a driving force, an extraordinary strength, to turn despair into a steadfast belief, even though that belief sometimes seemed unrealistic and far-fetched to those around her. She never moved out of her house in Hope Springs, even though many friends and relatives advised her to go to a new place, to start a new life, to forget the painful past, to find some peace for her soul. She was afraid that if her children one day somehow tried to return, they would not find their mother, would not find their old home where they had first cried out at birth and spent their earliest childhood years. The room of the 3 boys on the 2nd floor was kept almost exactly as it was on the day they disappeared, with the small beds neatly made, the wooden toys that Mr. John, her husband, had lovingly handcrafted for them still on the shelves, the old picture books, the tiny clothes still neatly folded in the closet, as if they had just gone out to play for a little while and would be back soon. Every year, on David, Michael, and Peter's birthday, May 10th, Sarah Miller would bake a large cake herself, a cake she knew for sure that if her sons were still home, they would fight over blowing out the candles and demand the biggest piece. She would light the sparkling candles, then sit alone in the deathly quiet room, softly singing the happy birthday song she used to sing to her children with all her love, tears silently streaming down her face, a face now deeply etched with the wrinkles of time and unending sorrow. She relentlessly contacted the Hope Springs Police Department year after year, at least a few times, just to ask if there was any new information regarding her son's case. Even though after many years, the younger police officers might not even clearly remember the details of that old case, they could only offer her sympathetic words and a sense of helplessness, as there were never any new leads. She sought out private investigators whenever she managed to save a little money from her part-time jobs. But the exorbitant costs of investigations with no clear starting point made it impossible for her to pursue them long. She joined support groups for families of missing children, people in similar predicaments, to share her pain, to find empathy, and also to learn from others' experiences in searching. She read every newspaper clipping, every television announcement about missing children found somewhere, her heart leaping with a fragile hope, only to sink again when it wasn't her sons. Disappointment repeated itself endlessly, but it never completely extinguished her belief. When the internet began to develop and become more common in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Sarah Miller, though elderly by then and not tech-savvy, still made an effort to learn how to use a computer from her eldest daughter, Laura, who was always by her side, encouraging and supporting her. She patiently sat for hours in front of the computer screen, learning to type each letter, learning to access websites. She posted her son's story, the last clear photographs she had of them, on forums for finding relatives, on newly emerging social media sites, with the faint hope that someone, somewhere in this vast world, perhaps even her own sons when they grew up and became curious about their past, might recognize them, might provide some precious piece of information, however small. There were times when loneliness and despair almost consumed her, especially after Mr. John, her husband, her only life partner who shared this burden and pain with her, passed away from a serious illness more than 10 years after their sons disappeared. The pain of losing her husband compounded the pain of losing her children, making her feel as if she could no longer stand. Many long nights she lay awake, clutching the only clear photograph of her 3 boys and her wedding picture with John. Her tears dried up. Unanswerable questions tormented her mind, haunting her every second. Why my children? Where are they in this wide world? Are they still alive? Are they safe? Are they loved and well cared for? But then, with every new dawn, seeing the faint sunlight filtering through the window, seeing the mementos of her children still there, intact like a reminder, the flame of hope within her would be rekindled, albeit just a tiny trembling spark. An invisible strength, a sacred bond of motherhood, helped her to stand firm and continue walking on that lonely and arduous journey. She always believed that as long as she was alive, she would never stop searching. Her children were still out there somewhere in this world, and one day, somehow, fate would bring them back to her loving embrace as if they had never left. And it was indeed that unquenchable flame of hope, that tireless and extraordinary perseverance, that kept Sarah Miller's mind always alert, always hopeful, so that 30 years later, on a fateful January afternoon, while looking through old mementos, she could recognize a tiny but crucial detail in a long-forgotten old photograph, a detail that changed everything. But before that glimmer of light appeared, before she sank into those long years of lonely and silent searching, what were the initial efforts of her family, and the entire Hope Springs community like, immediately after the horrific and sudden tragedy struck their small family? Let us journey back in time once more, to the very beginning of it all. That fateful morning of July 15th, 1981, in the small town of Hope Springs, Texas. That summer morning, which seemed so peaceful and beautiful, held within it a horrific tragedy, a nightmare about to descend upon a small family brimming with happiness. The town of Hope Springs, at that time, was a miniature portrait of the tranquility of rural America. Small, winding roads shaded by ancient oak trees, pretty wooden houses with white picket fences, gardens full of roses and sunflowers always radiant under the golden Texas summer sun. Life in Hope Springs flowed smoothly, slowly, where everyone seemed to know each other by face and name, where friendly greetings and warm smiles echoed on every street corner, in every shop. And amidst this absolute peace was the small but laughter-filled home of the Miller family. Mrs. Sarah Miller, then just in her early 30s, a young, beautiful, and energetic woman, with a smile always on her lips and boundless love for her husband and 3 triplet sons. Her husband, Mr. John Miller, a gentle, unassuming carpenter, his hands rough from work but incredibly skilled, always worked diligently to provide for his small family. Their greatest happiness and pride were their 3 handsome triplet sons, identical as 3 peas in a pod. David, Michael, and Peter just turned 4 years old. The 3 boys were like 3 little angels, the center of the universe for Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Only Sarah, with a mother's love and keen observation, could easily distinguish them through their little habits and secret birthmarks she often teased them about. David, the eldest, seemed a bit stronger and more mature than his 2 brothers, often acting like the big brother, protecting his siblings in their childish games. Michael was a bit more contemplative, quieter, often preferring to sit alone, looking at colorful picture books his mother bought him, or playing with wooden blocks his father made. And Peter, the youngest, was the most mischievous and active, always up to some playful prank, running around the house, filling it with ceaseless laughter and occasional loving scolds. That fateful Saturday morning, July 15th, 1981, also began like any other weekend morning in the Miller household. Mr. John had woken up early, had a quick breakfast, and gone to his workshop to finish some urgent orders. Mrs. Sarah, after preparing breakfast for her 3 growing boys, had instructed them to play nicely in the small, fenced front yard, where their favorite swing sets stood, along with a collection of their beloved toys. A red plastic truck David was always attached to, a worn-out teddy bear Michael never let go of when sleeping, and Peter's dozens of colorful building blocks. David, Michael, Peter, my 3 little darlings, play nicely now. Don't run out into the main road. It's dangerous. Mommy's going inside to hang out the laundry and prepare lunch, and then I'll come out and make those chocolate and strawberry cakes you love. Sarah called out from the kitchen door, her voice full of tenderness and love. The 3 children's high-pitched, clear "Yes, Mommy" replied, interspersed with giggles as they resumed their game of chase. Those sounds, to Sarah, were like a familiar, sweet, and peaceful background music to the happy life she was living. She could never have imagined that those would be the last complete sounds of a peaceful morning, before the most horrific nightmare of her life descended, robbing her of everything. While Sarah was busy with her household chores in the kitchen, the sound of the blender preparing ingredients for the cake her boys loved might have drowned out any unusual sounds, any strange noises that might have occurred outside in the small yard. It was precisely at that moment that a familiar figure, a person no one could have suspected, slowly approached the yard where the 3 children, David, Michael, and Peter, were playing innocently, completely unguarded. It was Martha Henderson, a former neighbor of the Miller family who had moved away from this street a few months prior, but still occasionally dropped by. Martha had always appeared to be a gentle, quiet woman, and especially fond of children. She often brought them small candies, inexpensive but novel toys. The Miller boys, with their childish innocence and trust, also seemed to like the nice Aunt Martha, who was always cheerful and brought gifts. No one knows exactly what Martha Henderson said to the 3 children on that fateful morning. Perhaps promises of bigger chocolate bars, more beautiful toys waiting for them somewhere. Perhaps an invitation to see a litter of incredibly cute newborn kittens just around testifies. All that is known is that, with a smile perceived as sweet and a prior acquaintance that created a perfect cover, Martha Henderson easily gained the trust of the 3 little angels. She might have taken their hands, or perhaps even carried them one by one to her old, inconspicuous car, a car she had prepared and parked effettos a hidden spot nearby. The three children, perhaps still cheerful, excited by the promises, without a shred of doubt, without a cry of protest, followed their kind neighbor. The car slowly rolled away, then quickly disappeared from the quiet little street, taking with it three tiny souls and also the future, the happiness of an entire family. It all happened in just a few short minutes, a calculation of extreme precision, coldness, and cruelty. A few minutes later, when the blender in the kitchen had stopped, when the household chores were temporarily settled, Sarah called out to the yard, her voice still cheerful. "My darlings, David, Michael, Peter, come inside now. It's getting sunny. Your cakes are almost ready." No answer, only a frightening silence, an unusual silence that a mother of three active young children could immediately sense. Sarah frowned, a vague sense of unease beginning to creep into her mind. She quickly stepped out the door. The yard was chillingly empty. David's favorite red plastic truck lay overturned in the middle of the path. Michael's old teddy bear was forgotten under the old oak tree. Peter's colorful building blocks were still scattered unfinished on the grass. But where were her three children? "David? Michael? Peter?" She called out louder, her voice starting to tremble with anxiety, panic beginning to set in. "Where are you? Are you hiding from Mommy? Don't play like that! Come out now!" She began to search around the small yard, then ran hastily out onto the street, looking around everywhere, calling her children's names in vain. Her face turned from surprise to anxiety, and then quickly to utter panic when she couldn't see any sign of any of her three children. Her heart felt as if someone was squeezing it with an iron fist. An icy chill ran down her spine, a horrific fear she had never experienced in her life. And then a blood-curdling scream, tearing through the silence of the summer morning, a scream cheto abang ball the despair and agony of a mother realizing the worst possible thing might have happened. "My children! John! Has anyone seen my children?" Sarah's desperate scream awakened the entire small neighborhood of Hope Springs. Neighbors rushed out of their houses, their faces showing clear worry and shock. The police were called immediately. Mr. John Miller, upon receiving the urgent news from a neighbor, rushed home from his workshop, his face ashen, disbelieving what was happening to his family. An urgent but then quickly hopeless search began immediately thereafter. Sarah, John, along with their kind neighbors and the local police force, scoured every nook and cranny of the town. From the roadside bushes, the vast cornfields, to the stagnant ponds and the small woods on the outskirts. They called out the children's names relentlessly, hoping to hear a faint, weak response. But all there was a terrifying, deafening silence. The three children, David, Michael, and Peter Miller, seemed to have vanished into thin air, leaving behind not a single trace, not a single clue. Darkness had truly descended upon the Miller family and upon the once peaceful small town of Hope Springs. That was the fateful day, July 15th, 1981, the day that marked the beginning of 30 long years of tears, of waiting, and of a flame of hope that would never be extinguished. And so we have journeyed back together through 3 long decades. From the moment of overwhelming, joyous reunion at Hope Springs Airport, we have gradually peeled back layer after layer of secrecy. The tense days of preparation for the fateful meeting, the dramatic confrontation that exposed the perpetrator, the faint glimmer of hope from an old, faded photograph. Then we journeyed further back into 30 long years of deception and a mother's relentless search, to finally return to that fateful summer morning in 1981, where the horrific tragedy began. A journey back in time, not to change the past, but to understand what happened, to feel more deeply the pain of separation and the boundless joy of reunion. The story of the Miller family, of Sarah and her 3 long-lost sons, is a powerful and vivid testament that, no matter how dark the shadows may be, no matter how cruel and relentless time may seem, the great strength of maternal love, tireless perseverance, and an unshakable belief in good things can still create miracles, can still light up the end of the darkest tunnel. The crime of child abduction is one of the cruelest and most inhumane. It not only steals a child, a small and innocent soul, but also destroys an entire family, leaving scars that can never fully fade in the souls of those left behind, those who must live with that pain and loss. This story serves as a profound and powerful reminder to all of us of the fragility of happiness and of the need to always be vigilant, to join hands in protecting the young shoots of society, our small and innocent angels. But above all, the story of Sarah Miller is an immortal ode to hope, a flame that never goes out, even in the coldest and darkest winter nights of life. She has taught us that it is never too late to seek the truth, never too late to hope for a reunion, for a miracle. And sometimes, the smallest, most insignificant details, old photographs seemingly forgotten in a dusty corner, can hold the key to unlocking the greatest secrets of life, to changing an entire destiny that seemed to have been sealed. And as we saw at the beginning of this story, after 30 long years, that flame of hope truly blazed brightly again, illuminating the path for an unbelievable reunion. An ending that perhaps Sarah herself dared not dream of during the most desperate and painful years of her life. The life ahead for them, for Sarah, for David, Michael, Peter, and also for Laura, the daughter who had always stood by her mother, will undoubtedly still hold many challenges to heal the emotional wounds, to rebuild the bonds of kinship that had been broken and missed for so many years. But now, the most important thing is that they have each other. They have found each other. And that, indeed, is the greatest victory of love, of faith, and of tireless human perseverance. Thank you sincerely for listening to the story of 3 stolen decades. It is hoped that through this story, each of us will cherish more the precious happy moments with our families and loved ones, and will never stop believing in the miracles, however small, that always exist somewhere in this life.